Hey friends, welcome to another episode of Bonsai 101, the series where we learn about all aspects of bonsai cultivation and design in bite-sized chunks. Today we're going to talk about proportion and balance. But before we do that, let me introduce myself. I'm a professional bonsai artist living in Portland, Oregon. If you like what you see here, check out my online bonsai workshops at learnbonsai.com. You'll find there everything from beginner to advanced bonsai, pruning, wiring, and even pottery. There is new content released every week, and the videos are available forever so you can watch them at your own pace. Alright, let's get into it. Now, when we start to cultivate our bonsai, there is one thing that we have to keep in mind all of the time, and that is the overall proportion and balance of the tree. The reason for this is because ultimately we want our bonsai to replicate nature, right? And in nature, there are some basic rules that trees follow. In order to survive and thrive, the roots, trunk, branches, and crown of a tree need to be appropriately sized with each other and balanced so that the tree can live in harmony with its environment. If any one of these parts were too large or too small or not properly balanced, then the tree would not thrive. So in bonsai, we are trying to create a small tree that replicates these natural proportions and balance. So in order to do this, we have to understand what makes up a tree and how each part relates to the others. And we can break down a tree into 3 different sections: the roots, the trunk, and the branches and foliage. So let us take a look at each of these in detail and see what makes for good proportions and balance. First off, let's take a look at this Chinese elm. What we want to focus on first is the trunk. The trunk has 2 important characteristics that we want to take note of: taper and diameter. As you can see, the trunk of this tree is well tapered. It's thicker towards the bottom and thinner towards the top. This is important because in nature, if a tree had a straight, thick trunk without taper, it would lack stability. So we can see that this tree is stable because the trunk is wider at the bottom where it meets the root system. And you can also see that it's thinner at the top where it supports the canopy. Now, as far as the diameter of the trunk goes, we want to make sure that the trunk is thick enough to support the weight of the branches and foliage. If the trunk is too thin and the branches are too large, the branches will end up pulling the trunk down and causing it to grow at an angle, or even break off. So that's why we want to make sure that the trunk is thick enough. And finally, we want to make sure that the trunk has a nice clean taper from the root flare to the tip of the trunk. A nice clean taper just looks good, and it also helps us to visualize the tree better when it is growing naturally and freely. The taper is smooth and uninterrupted. Moving up to the branches, we want to make sure that the branches are appropriately sized for the trunk and they have good scale and balance with each other. So you don't want to have a really thick trunk and then small, slender branches. The branches need to be proportionally correct. This is something that we call scale in bonsai. Scale is really important because if the branches are too small for the trunk, then the tree will look out of balance and awkward. We want to have appropriately sized branches for the trunk. So this tree does a really good job of having well-balanced branches that are appropriately sized for the trunk. All of the branches are roughly the same thickness, and they re-thick enough to support their own small branch foliage. You can also see that the branches are gracefully scaling. They're getting smaller as they reach up towards the top of the tree. Another thing that I want to point out about the branches is the angle that they are coming out from the trunk. Each branch is coming out at a different angle from the trunk. This is important because it creates a more natural look. If all of the branches were coming out from the trunk in the exact same plane, it would look too artificial. Finally, let's take a look at the foliage. The foliage should be appropriately sized for the branches and the trunk. If the foliage is too small for the branches, the tree will look out of balance. If the foliage is too big, it will look out of scale. So we want to make sure that the foliage is appropriately sized for the branches and the trunk. Now, as far as balance goes, balance can be static or dynamic. Static balance is symmetrical balance. For example, a formal upright tree is a type of static balance. The branches are evenly distributed around the trunk. The tree is symmetrical. This creates a sense of calmness and stability. Dynamic balance is asymmetrical balance. For example, a cascade tree is a type of dynamic balance. The branches are unevenly distributed around the trunk. The tree is asymmetrical. This creates a sense of movement and excitement. Now I want to show you guys a few more examples of trees that have good proportions and balance. Now this Japanese maple has a nice tapered trunk that's free of any major defects. The branches are well balanced with each other. They're appropriately sized for the trunk and they have good scale. The foliage is appropriately sized for the branches and the trunk, and the tree has overall good balance. Now this pine has a nice tapered trunk. The branches are well balanced with each other and they have good scale. The foliage is appropriately sized for the branches and the trunk, and the tree has overall good balance. This trident maple has a nice tapered trunk. The branches are well balanced with each other and they have good scale. The foliage is appropriately sized for the branches and the trunk, and the tree has overall good balance. Now, this ficus has a nice tapered trunk. The branches are well balanced with each other and they have good scale. The foliage is appropriately sized for the branches and the trunk, and the tree has overall good balance. Now, this Chinese elm has a nice tapered trunk. The branches are well balanced with each other and they have good scale. The foliage is appropriately sized for the branches and the trunk, and the tree has overall good balance. Now this Japanese black pine has a nice tapered trunk. The branches are well balanced with each other and they have good scale. The foliage is appropriately sized for the branches and the trunk, and the tree has overall good balance. Now this Korean pine has a nice tapered trunk. The branches are well balanced with each other and they have good scale. The foliage is appropriately sized for the branches and the trunk, and the tree has overall good balance. Now, this larch has a nice tapered trunk. The branches are well balanced with each other and they have good scale. The foliage is appropriately sized for the branches and the trunk, and the tree has overall good balance. Alright, so I hope that you guys enjoyed those examples. I think that they're really beautiful trees, and they show you guys what good proportions and balance looks like in nature. Now, of course, not all bonsai are meant to have good proportions and balance, but most of them are. When you're looking at a bonsai, ask yourself, does this tree have good proportions and balance? Why or why not? So I've got a quiz for you guys. I'd love to hear what you think. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you think. Do you think this tree has good proportions and balance? Why or why not? Alright, so that's all I have for you guys today. I hope that you guys learned something, and I hope that you go out there and start cultivating some bonsai. Until next time, remember to enjoy the journey.